Malithi Kanuwana. I did my A-levels last year in 2019 in the stream of biology, and now I have been selected to the medical faculty. So, I'm a part of the Gampa Medical Students Association, the GMS 2019 batch. So, our group has started this YouTube channel in order to support the 2020 A-level students. So, according to the program, today I am going to conduct a lesson of biology, and the lesson would be Unit 8, Environmental Biology. And in this lesson, today I will be conducting the very first part of the lesson. Which is actually the easiest part of the lesson, which would end up at ecological pyramids. So, coming to the lesson, this lesson is quite easy, but it has a few definitions that need to be by-hearted exactly according to where it is mentioned in the resource book. So, at the very beginning of the lesson, there are two definitions like this, the definition for environment and definition for environmental biology. So, coming to the definition of environment, if we just consider what environment is, everything that surrounds an individual and how the individual interacts with everything that surrounds it is what we can simply call the environment. So, in that case, if we just look at these three words, physical, chemical and biotic components, they are simply everything that surrounds the individual, right? So, in that case, we can say that the environment is a complex of physical, chemical and biotic components that act on an organism or a whole ecological community of individuals. Ecological community of individuals. Then, coming to this part means now as we have studied in genetics, we know that it's not about the genes, but even the environment is very important to determine the various characters of an individual. So, when coming to this part means the same thing. It ultimately determines the form and survival of the organism. So, in that case, we can basically say that the environment is a complex of physical, chemical and biotic components that act on an organism or an ecological community and ultimately determines the form and survival. So, that's the first definition. So, coming to the second definition, environmental biology. So, simply this environmental biology, this term should mean the study of the environment. So, study of whatever that surrounds and interacts an individual should be the meaning of this. So, in very simple terms, we can say that environmental biology means the study of, now individuals means biological components, therefore, we can say that it's the study of biological components, how their relationship with each other, how they interact with each other and how they interact with the abiotic components. Right? So, in very simple terms, this is the meaning of environmental biology. But since there is a standard definition for environmental biology, if asked in the exam, this is the definition that needs to be written. So, that definition states that it is a scientific study of everything that surrounds an individual. So, the word everything comprises of this whole set of words. So, scientific study of origins, functions, relationships, interactions and natural history of living populations, communities, species, ecosystems in relation to dynamic environmental processes. So basically, this is what environmental biology means. This is the standard definition for it. So in the second part, we are going to talk about the organizational levels of the environment. So now we are going to talk about the environment elaborately. So in the organizational levels, we can find 5 basic levels: the individual, population, community, ecosystem and biosphere. So as we said, environment is basically everything that surrounds an individual. So basically, individual is the first organizational level of the environment. So an individual means any living organism. But we have to consider this part, who has his own characters of physiology, evolution and behavior in relation to environmental factors. So, we know that it's not just about the genes, but the environment affects an organism, affects the form and survival of an organism. So, in that case, we know every organism has his own set of genes, his own set of ancestors. That is why the word evolution is mentioned. So, a living organism has his own characters of behavior, physiology and evolution, but in relation to the environmental factors. It's not just the genes, but also the environment is also important. So basically an individual is a living organism who has his own characters of physiology, evolution and behavior in relation to environmental factors. So then coming to the second organization level is the population. So a population means a group of such individuals but belonging to the same species. A group of individuals of the same species. If it's humans, then it should be all about humans. Population means a group of humans. Likewise, a group of individuals of same species living in the same area. So we consider a particular frame and we consider all the organisms of the same species within that frame, within that area, producing fertile offspring by interbreeding. This part is for the survival of the particular species. For the survival of the species, producing fertile offspring is a must. Therefore, a population means a group of individuals of same species living in the same area, producing fertile offspring by interbreeding. So, the third level is community. Community means a collection of such populations of different species. That means a population means organisms of the same species. There are few such species, and when all those populations of different species come together within a frame, within a same area considered, that is what you call a community, and they should interact with each other as well. So a collection of population of different species living in the same area, interacting with each other, right? So that is what you call a community. Then when we consider population and community, these two are all about biotic components. We know biotic components means living things. So these two parts include living things only. So coming to the ecosystem, ecosystem is not just a collection of communities, but it is a collection of communities as well as the interacting abiotic factors. That means the collection of communities along with the abiotic factors assisted with them. Abiotic factors means the non-living factors like water, light, gases, nutrients, soil and all those things. Likewise, those non-living abiotic factors, when they interact with the collection of a lot of communities, then we can say it's an ecosystem. Right? So if we just consider an example, if we take the Yala National Park, if we say the elephant population in the elephants in Yala National Park, that's a population, elephant population in Yala National Park. So the considered frame, the considered area is Yala National Park. So elephants in Yala National Park means a population of elephants. But if we take elephants, parrots and such different species of animals together, that would be an animal community in Yala National Park. Once again, the area is Yala National Park. So when several species of animals are taken together, we can consider it as an animal community of Yala National Park. Likewise, if we take several species or several populations of plants together, that would be the plant community of Yala National Park. Then the animal community and the plant community along with the abiotic factors, the soil, water, light, gases, nutrients, all these abiotic factors, when they come together with the plant community and the animal community, then we can call it an ecosystem. There we can call that Yala National Park is one large ecosystem comprising of biotic and abiotic factors. Likewise, that is what you call, and so in an ecosystem we can find two components, biotic and abiotic, living and non-living. So the last one frame that we can draw, the largest frame, the largest area that we can consider on Earth is a biosphere, that is simply the entire portion of Earth inhabited by life, the entire portion of Earth that contains life. So in the next part we will be talking about the ecosystem elaborately. So when we consider an ecosystem, as we said earlier, there are two main components in an ecosystem. That's basically the biotic components and the abiotic components. So biotic components are the living components and abiotic components are the non-living components. So when we consider biotic components, so as we know, all the living organisms like plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, all these living organisms come under this category, biotic components. So when we consider abiotic components, the rest of the non-living components come under this category, like water, light, gases, soil, nutrients in soil, etc., etc. So all those non-living portions come under this topic, abiotic components. So basically we can obtain these abiotic components via the lithosphere, hydrosphere, atmosphere. As examples, we can see that soil is present in the lithosphere, water is found in hydrosphere, and the gases are found in atmosphere. So likewise we can obtain these abiotic components from lithosphere, hydrosphere and atmosphere. So they are the two main components of an ecosystem. So now as we said earlier as well, always biotic components are interacted with each other and with the abiotic components. So in an ecosystem we can find interactions. So basically we can find interactions between living things, and interactions between living things and non-living things, and interactions between non-living things themselves. Then when we consider the interactions between living things, they are called biotic interactions. That means solely how the living organisms interact with each other. So we can mention three examples. So we can say that they are like three modes of how biotic interactions happen in an ecosystem. So as examples we can take competitions, feeding relationships and symbiotic relationships. So basically when we consider competitions, they can be either interspecific or intraspecific. That means the competitions might be between species or within a species. So however, competitions exist in an ecosystem as a biotic interaction. Then coming to feeding relationships might happen between a host and a parasite, a predator and a prey, or likewise so many feeding relationships can happen, or so many feeding relationships exist in an ecosystem. Then symbiotic relationships, as we know about symbiotic relationships, they are always between individuals belonging to different species. Always individuals belonging to different species live in an ecological relationship with each other, forming a symbiotic relationship. So these are the three basic examples mentioned in the resource book for biotic interactions of an ecosystem. So coming to abiotic interactions, so without the abiotic factors, simply the living organisms cannot exist. So if we consider a plant, without taking up water from the soil solution, plants cannot live. Plants cannot survive without water. So likewise, without abiotic factors, biotic factors cannot really survive. Therefore, in that case, abiotic interactions are highly important. So one such example mentioned is uptake of water by plants. So plants through the roots, they take up water in the soil solution. So that's an example for biotic relationship. Then the last one is abiotic relationships. That means interactions that occur between non-living things themselves. So when we consider non-living things, we can take an example, chemical reactions in soil. So in soil there are so many components, non-living, abiotic components that are simply non-living, and chemical reactions occur between those components which are categorized under abiotic, abiotic interactions. So these interactions are also very important for the functioning of an ecosystem. So these are the interactions of an ecosystem. So in the next part we are going to talk about the concepts of an ecosystem. So when we consider we talked about the ecosystem previously. So now coming to the concepts of the ecosystem, there are two main concepts of an ecosystem. One is the niche and the other is the habitat. So when we consider the niche means simply the role of an organism in an ecosystem. Habitat is the exact physical area that a species lives. So we need to understand that the niche is always about an organism and the habitat is always about a species. The habitat is about a species and the niche is about an organism. So simply the definition is niche is the role of an organism in an ecosystem. Habitat is the exact physical area that a species lives. So coming to the niche, when we consider the role, simply the role means how the organism makes its living. How and what an organism should do in order to survive in an ecosystem. so that can be explained elaborately in certain areas. What everything that an organism does in order to survive. So how the organism gets its energy. Energy is required for survival. So how the organism gets its energy. Then how the organism passes that energy through the ecosystem. Then how the organism interacts with the rest of the environment. Without interactions, a particular organism cannot survive in an environment. So in an ecosystem. So how the organism interacts with the rest of the environment with the other biotic and abiotic factors. Then its role in recycling minerals that normally happens after actually death and also during other various processes. Every organism has a role in recycling of minerals. So how an organism, what is the role of an organism in recycling minerals? Then tolerance to environmental conditions such as temperature and other environmental conditions. So these are several ways how the role of an organism in an ecosystem is fulfilled. So these are certain aspects of that role. So simply which is the role of the organism in an ecosystem. So coming to habitat, habitat is like the exact physical area that a species live, but that's kind of anonymous. That's kind of an anonymous thing. So like we cannot say this is my habitat. So there is an exact physical place. So since we cannot like name it, we use this. We use different examples, or we use different factors, environmental factors, to explain, to describe the habitat. So in that case, the examples that we use normally are amount of sunlight received each day to the habitat, how much sunlight has been received every day. Then the range of annual temperatures, annual rainfall, soil condition. Likewise, we can use these examples to describe the habitat. As an example, if we take the Singharaja forest, which is the ecosystem that we are considering, if we consider wet soil, worms reside in wet soil. So worms means the species that we are referring to. They normally live in wet soil. So wet soil means the soil condition. We have used this particular example, soil condition, this particular example to describe the habitat of that particular organism. Since the habitat it really exists physically, but it's quite anonymous. So we have used this particular example to explain the habitat of worms. Likewise, we can use these examples to describe the habitat of a species. So habitat is always about the species, niche is about an organism. We will be talking about food webs and food chains. So food webs and food chains are also parts of the ecosystem. So when we consider food webs are the real things that exist within an ecosystem. When we consider food chains, it is the food chains that make a food web. So simply a food web is an interconnected network of food chains. When we consider an ecosystem, we cannot find isolated food chains. We can always find food webs, an entangled network of several food chains. So reason is, when we consider a primary producer, so simply when we consider the first trophic level of a food chain, a primary producer is consumed by various primary consumers. That is the reason why always there are food webs in an ecosystem and not isolated food chains. So simply a food web is an interconnected network of so many food chains. So coming to a food chain, now if we just extract one food chain from this food web, we just look at this grass, grasshopper, frog, eagle, that is the food chain that is written here. So when we consider this particular food chain, it starts with grass, then goes to grasshopper, frog, and then finally eagle. So we can see that there are 4 levels in this food chain. So in a food chain, these levels are called trophic levels. So simply trophic levels means different levels of a food chain. And when we always a food chain starts with a primary producer. Every food chain starts with a primary producer. So always the first trophic level is a primary producer. So basically, a primary producer is an autotroph. It's definitely an autotroph. It might be a photoautotroph or a chemoautotroph, but in most cases it is photosynthetic. It is a photoautotroph. In most cases it is photosynthetic. So grass is also a photosynthetic autotroph, which is a primary producer in this food chain. So when we consider the second trophic level, it's called the primary consumer, third trophic level secondary consumer, and fourth trophic level tertiary consumer. So normally in a food chain, maximum number of trophic levels that we can find is 4 or 5 and minimum number is 2, right? So when we consider the rest of the consumer part, the primary consumer is normally a herbivore. When it comes to a terrestrial ecosystem, it's normally a herbivore, but in an aquatic ecosystem, it might be an algae or bacteria eater. Because when we consider primary producers in terrestrial ecosystems, the primary producers are normally plants, green plants. But when we consider aquatic ecosystems, it might be phytoplankton. So phytoplankton means normally algae or cyanobacteria. So in that case, primary consumers of aquatic ecosystems might be algae or bacteria eaters. So secondary consumers are normally considered as primary carnivores, and then tertiary consumers are normally the real carnivores, right? The real carnivores. So this is everything about the food chain, the trophic levels, the producer and the consumer levels, and all these things. So then, looking at this, we can build up a particular definition, a standard definition for a food chain. So here we see that it's quite linear, therefore a linear sequence then of organisms through which nutrients and energy pass from one trophic level to the next. So when a grasshopper eats a grass, the energy stored in the tissues of grass, along with the nutrients stored in the grass goes inside the grasshopper. Therefore, nutrients and the energy that was stored in grass will now be transferred to the grasshopper. Then the nutrients and energy stored in the grasshopper will be transferred to a frog when the frog consumes the grasshopper. So in that case, we can see how nutrients and energy is passed from one trophic level to the next. Then this always starts from a primary producer. So looking at all these things, we can say that a food chain is a linear sequence of organisms through which nutrients and energy pass from one trophic level to the next, starting from a primary producer. So that's basically the theory about a food chain. Okay, so the next part is also about ecosystems. So we previously talked about food chains and food webs, how food chains form food webs. So now we are going to talk about the energy transfer and the energy loss that happens through a food chain in a particular ecosystem. So when we consider the energy transfer part happens from the sun. The energy to all living beings is received from the sun. The solar radiation is fixed into chemical energy by plants. So simply plants means primary producers, where we can consider green plants and some animals like algae and bacteria. So these primary producers, they absorb sunlight, they absorb the radiant energy of the sun and fix them as chemical energy by a process called photosynthesis, as we know. So it is the sunlight that is being fixed into chemical energy. So ultimately, the energy that all these levels have is received from the solar energy that was fixed within the green plant, within the particular primary producer. So ultimately, we can say that energy is received to everyone by sun. So simply, when we consider the next stages, so when we consider this, that is the transfer. So when we consider the energy loss, we can see that in every step, when going from one trophic level to the next trophic level, 90% of the energy absorbed is wasted and only 10% is transferred. So what happens is this: when a primary producer fixes a particular amount of energy it received as sunlight into chemical energy, a large portion, actually 90% of that energy that was initially fixed into chemical energy by photosynthesis is wasted and consumed away as basically respiration and for its other biological processes. Now we know not just in plants but also in these levels even, everyone has their own biological processes going on inside their bodies. So in that case, we know that those biological processes require a lot of amount of heat. So as heat and as respiration, 90% of the energy that the primary producer fixes within it from sunlight as chemical energy is wasted away and consumed, simply consumed away and wasted away for metabolism, simply metabolic activities, basically as heat, and for respiration 90% is lost. So only 10% is remaining. So when the primary consumer, suppose a grasshopper eating grass, when the primary consumer consumes this primary producer, when the grasshopper eats the grass, as we said, 10% of the energy that was remaining will be transferred into the primary consumer. That 10%, that remaining 10% will be stored in the body tissues of the plant, and that will be transferred to the primary consumer once it eats the primary producer. So whatever is stored in the tissues will be transferred to the next trophic level. So then now the 10% of the energy that was fixed is now within the primary consumer since it ate the primary producer. Then when we consider the primary consumer, now it has the energy received from this, the 10% energy when received from this. Now this organism also has its own metabolic process, its own biological processes. So what happens is, this in this organism's body as well, 90% is wasted once again as heat and respiration. So whatever it received from the primary producer, out of that 90% will be wasted and only 10% will be stored within its body tissues. Then once the primary consumer, suppose the grasshopper, when the grasshopper is eaten by the frog, the primary consumer is consumed by the secondary consumer, the energy that was stored in the tissues of this one will move on to this one. So that's how the 10% of the energy is transferred from one trophic level to the next. So we can see that with the 10% being transferred, 90% of the energy of that particular level that was absorbed from the previous level will be wasted away and consumed away for metabolic processes. So basically we can see, so if we take as an example, if we take if the amount of energy that was fixed from sunlight, which was converted into chemical energy from sunlight by the plant, by the primary producer, is X, then 0.9x, an amount of 0.9x will be removed or wasted away, and only a remaining of 0.1x will move into the primary consumer once the plant is eaten by the primary consumer. Then out of this 0.1x, another portion of 0.1x, another portion of 10 over 100, 10% will be transferred to the next level. So it would be 0.01x. So here it would be 0.001x. So likewise, only 10% is transferred. So we can see that there is significant energy loss when going from one trophic level to the next trophic level in a food chain, in an ecosystem. So this is the main reason why I mentioned earlier that only 4 or 5, the maximum number of links that is possible in a food chain is 4 or 5, because there is considerable heat loss, there is considerable energy loss due to heat and respiration. Therefore, when moving to the front, the number of links possible becomes decreased. Therefore, the number of trophic levels in a food chain is normally the number of trophic levels, in the maximum number of trophic levels of a food chain is normally 4 or 5, and the minimum amount is normally 2. So with this, looking at this, so that is how energy transfer and energy loss occurs. So now looking at this, some part of the radiant energy of the sun is fixed within the primary producers, as we said. So looking at that, we know that sunlight is fixed into chemical energy, and this chemical energy is used up to produce organic matter, right? So this energy is used up to create organic matter. So not just the 90% that was wasted, but also the 10% that is transferred, that's stored within the tissues. So all the energy received from sun, that is converted to chemical energy, is used to produce organic matter. So in that case, simply primary production, we can take the term primary production and we can take a standard definition for it as the amount of organic matter produced by autotrophs in a given area in a given period of time. Simply what this means is the total amount of light energy, but this indirectly says is the amount of light energy absorbed by the primary producer to produce. This is actually like equivalent to the amount of light energy absorbed by the sun, by the primary producer from the sun and fixed into chemical energy. That's quite indirect. That's like the indirect meaning of this part, the amount of organic matter, because all that energy is used to produce organic matter. So in terms of units, we can take as grams per square meter per day or kilograms per hectare per year. Definitely in a given area, in a given period of time, specifies the area and the time period that we are considering. So primary production has a standard definition: the amount of organic matter produced by autotrophs, the primary producers, in a given area, in a given period of time. So these are the units used. Okay, so in this part we are going to talk about the ecological pyramid. So ecological pyramid is not something different from food chains. It's actually like a graphical representation of food chains itself, right? So here, simply ecological pyramids means we use a pyramid shaped structure which might be either upright or inverted in order to represent the trophic structure of an ecosystem. Simply, if we just consider a food chain, in order to show that food chain, not just one food chain, maybe several food chains, in order to represent those food chains, we use the diagrammatical representation. So it shows the trophic structure of an ecosystem. Since we use a graphical representation, we can say that ecological pyramids are graphical representations of the trophic structure of an ecosystem. So when we consider the ecological pyramids, this concept was presented by Charles Elton. Therefore, these pyramids are also called as Elton pyramids. So, ecological pyramids are also called as Elton pyramids. So, when we consider these pyramids, there are three main types of pyramids: pyramid of energy, pyramids of numbers, and pyramids of biomass, which means when we consider one ecosystem in terms of the energy flow, we draw a pyramid, we use a graphical representation to represent the trophic structure of that particular ecosystem in terms of energy flow. In pyramids of numbers, it's in terms of the number of the organisms present in that particular ecosystem. Then in pyramids of biomass, what we use, the criteria that we use is the biomass. Biomass means it's the dry weight. We use the dry weight of that ecosystem. We represent the trophic structure of that ecosystem in terms of biomass in the pyramids of biomass. Biomass means the dry weight. So then there are some certain MCQ points that needs to be remembered. So remember that these ecological pyramids, they might be either upright or inverted. But when we consider pyramids of energy, as we have learned through a food chain in an ecosystem, always there is a loss of energy. 90% of the energy is lost when moving from one trophic level to the next trophic level. So therefore, there is a significant energy loss in an ecosystem. In any ecosystem, there is an energy loss. So these pyramids of energy can never be inverted, which means the energy of the base level, the primary producer level, can never be less than the energy of the final consumer level or the final trophic level. It never happens. So always pyramids of energy are upright. Always pyramids of energy are upright. They are never inverted. Then when we consider pyramids of numbers, they are both upright and inverted. They are both upright and inverted. When we consider pyramids of biomass, they can also be upright or inverted. So when we consider these two, basically, when we consider pyramids of numbers, they are normally inverted in parasitic ecosystems. When we consider, as an example, if we just look at a parasite biting a host, then the host, when we consider in terms of numbers, the number of parasites is definitely greater than the number of hosts. Therefore, the pyramid becomes inverted because the second level is higher in number than the first level. And when we consider pyramids of biomass, they can also be both upright and inverted, and normally pyramids of biomass are inverted in aquatic ecosystems. The reason is, when we consider phytoplankton, now when we consider aquatic ecosystems, normally the primary producers are Normally the primary producers are phytoplanktons. Now when we consider the dry weight, even if we take all the phytoplanktons in a unit area and take their dry weight, then definitely the dry weight of the zooplanktons will be greater than that of the phytoplanktons. So definitely the consumer levels of an ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem, will definitely have a higher dry weight than the primary producer level. So then the pyramid becomes inverted. So these are certain points that needs to be remembered. So now we were talking about ecological pyramids. So as we were talking about ecological pyramids, we said that these ecological pyramids can be either upright or inverted. Whatever it is, always the base, the first one belongs to the primary producer. The first level, the first part belongs to the primary producer. Be it the large base or the small pointed end, it's always of the primary producer. And the second level is of the primary consumer, third level is of the secondary consumer, and the last level is of the tertiary consumer, or maybe it might have 5 based on the number of consumers or the number of links present in that particular ecosystem. So this is not just about one food chain, but about a whole ecosystem. We can represent the whole ecosystem. That means we can mention several primary producers inside in the part of primary producer. So this is how an upright pyramid and an inverted pyramid look like. So we said that there are 3 types of pyramids: energy pyramids, number pyramids, and biomass pyramids. So coming to energy pyramids, we said that energy pyramids are always upright, because when moving upwards, always, definitely in a food chain, there is a loss of energy. Always the energy present in the primary producer is definitely greater than the energy present in the other successive levels. It's definitely greater than that of the primary consumer. Primary consumer definitely has a higher energy than the secondary consumer likewise. So when going up, there is a decrease in rate of energy flow. Definitely the amount of energy present in the upper levels is lesser than the lower levels. Therefore, always this pyramid is always upright. But number pyramids and biomass pyramids can be either upright or inverted. Then, when we consider energy pyramids, there are 3 factors clearly depicted from an energy pyramid. There are 3 factors clearly depicted from an energy pyramid. First one is, it shows that the flow of energy at different trophic levels. It shows simply an energy pyramid shows the energy flow at different trophic levels. It says that the first level has a higher flow of energy than the second level. Likewise, it shows the flow of energy at different trophic levels. Higher energy, relatively lower energy. Likewise, the flow of energy is depicted. Then the second factor is, it shows that energy is maximum at the lowest level, at the primary producing level, and minimum at the final trophic level, which is basically the tertiary or the quaternary consumers. So it definitely shows that the base, the first one, has the maximum level, the lowest level has the maximum energy, and the highest level has the lowest energy. Then the third factor is that there is a successive loss of energy as heat and respiration at each trophic level. So in each trophic level, there is a successive loss of energy as heat and respiration. That is the reason, as we mentioned, that is the reason why energy pyramids are always upright. So this is the main point about energy pyramids. Spoke about the pyramids of energy. So now coming to pyramids of numbers and pyramids of biomass. As we said earlier, pyramids of numbers and pyramids of biomass can be present both in the upright form and in the inverted form. Unlike energy pyramids are always upright. So when we consider pyramids of numbers and pyramids of biomass, they are both usually they are both upright in terrestrial ecosystems. In terrestrial ecosystems, normally both these pyramids are upright. The reason is actually, when we consider a normal food chain in a terrestrial ecosystem, producer to herbivore then being consumed by the carnivore, in this common food chain, normally the number of producers is greater than the number of primary consumers. If we just take the amount of grass, definitely the number of grasses is definitely greater than the number of grasshoppers. So definitely this happens. So here also net biomass of the producers are normally, the net biomass of the producers is normally greater than the net biomass of the primary consumers. So therefore, in terrestrial ecosystems, when it comes to terrestrial ecosystems, pyramids of biomass and pyramids of numbers take an upright shape. But when we consider pyramids of numbers, they become inverted in parasitic food chain. So when we consider a parasitic food chain like this, host being bitten up by a parasite, we know that definitely more than the number of hosts, the number of parasites is definitely greater. Number of mosquitoes is definitely greater than the number of humans when a certain area is considered. Therefore, the number of the second level is greater than the number of the first level numbers in the first level numbers. In the first level, therefore, the pyramid takes an inverted shape. So when it comes to pyramids of biomass, we should know that always a dry mass is considered. Right? Always a dry mass should be considered because it is a dry mass that represents the energy present as organic matter, not the fresh weight with water and all. So when we consider, as we said, in the pyramids of biomass are normally upright in terrestrial ecosystems, but when we consider aquatic ecosystems, in aquatic ecosystems, pyramids of biomass are inverted. The reason is when we consider a normal food chain that occurs in an aquatic ecosystem, it's something like this: phytoplankton being eaten by zooplankton being eaten by larger fish. So when we consider this food chain, this particular food chain, definitely if we take the dry weight, removing the water, not fresh weight, after removing the water, the remaining dry weight of phytoplanktons is definitely less than the dry weight of zooplankton. So normally we know that phytoplankton means algae, cyanobacteria and all those things. When we consider zooplanktons, they are also small creatures, and we know that the dry weight of phytoplanktons, although the number is greater, the dry weight of phytoplanktons will be definitely less than the dry weight of zooplankton. So in that case, definitely the first level has a lesser biomass than the second level. Therefore, definitely in aquatic ecosystems, pyramids of biomass take an inverted shape. So basically, we should know that pyramids of numbers are inverted in parasitic food chains, pyramids of biomass are inverted in aquatic ecosystems. Otherwise, in terrestrial ecosystems, both pyramids of numbers and pyramids of biomass are upright. The next part, actually this is the last part of the first part of environmental biology, cycling of materials in an ecosystem. So when we consider the materials, those materials like materials means water, nutrients like components in an ecosystem. So these materials are very important for the survival of living organisms. Living organisms should definitely use these materials in order to survive. They should utilize these materials. So materials are utilized by living organisms. So when things are utilized, they tend to finish. When there is a particular definite amount of something, and if we use it, then the amount would reduce, and at one point of time it would finish. But in the case of an ecosystem, these materials, they do not finish off completely. The reason is the cycling of materials in the ecosystem. So as an example, if we just look at this, if we consider a plant, now for the survival of the plant, it definitely has to take up water, nutrients and other types of minerals and a lot of other things present in soil and in the ecosystem. So it should definitely absorb several things from the ecosystem in order to survive. So it consumes these things. So with consumption, these materials go inside the plant. But we know that when these organisms die, all organisms die one day. When we consider this plant also dies one day. When the plant dies, we know that it is decomposed by decomposers. All organisms, when they die, they are decomposed by decomposers. Now normally decomposers are bacteria, fungi, and there are other types of decomposers as well. So these decomposers, they decompose the living organisms once they are dead. So with the decomposition, this plant that was once a plant will be decomposed into the soil. So what happens is, when this plant is decomposed, once again all those materials once absorbed by the plant for its consumption and survival, they would once again come to the soil. So then we can see that whatever all the materials that are present in an ecosystem gets restored once again after decomposition. So this is called the cycling of materials in an ecosystem. We can see that it occurs as a cycle. It is consumed in one part, and then once dead it is decomposed and once again reaches the ecosystem. So all materials in an ecosystem are cycled. So this is called cycling of materials in an ecosystem. This is the reason why materials do not finish. The amount of materials present in an ecosystem do not finish. So doesn't finish. So when we consider this, we can see that there are two directions in this. So that is why we say that material flow is bidirectional. Material flow is bidirectional. But when we consider energy flow as we said earlier is unidirectional. It is never restored back. It cannot be once lost, it is lost. So energy flow is unidirectional while material flow is bidirectional. So these are the things that need to be remembered under this topic. So basically that's it for the first part of environmental biology. So if we just revise whatever we did for the first part of environmental biology, first we spoke about what is environment, what is environmental biology, then we came to organizational levels of the environment, then we elaborately spoke about the ecosystem, the components, the interactions of an ecosystem, then came to food chains and then food webs. Then after that we talked about the energy transfer and energy loss through a food chain in an ecosystem. Then we came to ecological pyramids, the three types of pyramids, and then finally how materials are cycled in an ecosystem and why this is important. So basically that's the whole thing for the first part of environmental biology. So I hope this video was useful and informative for you. Thank you.